My name's Rowe. I'm filming for the Fillius Jazz Archive and very pleased to have guitarist Laurence Juber with me today. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
I'm not sure irony is the right word, but I'd like to point out that 4 summers ago, we had a conversation on film and we were face to face in Glasgow.
Yes.
And now we're having a second one and we're both on opposite ends of America. So
yeah,
comment on that.
Technology. Yeah. I mean, especially, I appreciate the fact that we can do this and I can do, regular Facebook Live concerts by virtue of the technology. I mean, you go back 15, 20 years, it would not have been the same thing. And being able to play for quite a substantial audience. I mean, I've had anywhere up to 7,000, 8,000 people on especially anything that's Beatle related tends to draw a much bigger crowd. But regularly, I mean, I think yesterday for my Monday session, I think live was probably about 600 or 700, and last time I looked was over 2,000. So, and because you've got the live audience, but then it's time shifted too, because it just gets instantly archived. So, it's a way of keeping myself in shape, and also, maintaining a relationship with an audience. But it's not monetizable. At least not easily monetizable. And it's not really a piece of business as much as it's just an artistic exercise.
Okay, well, that's a good way to put it. One thing I love about your show is what I'm going to call the face chords. Do you know what I'm talking about?
You mean in terms of whatever facial expressions go along with stretches or, yeah. Well, playing guitar is a very physical thing. And, for me, it's at my age now. I mean, I'm 60, what am I, 67? Yeah, 67. Decisions, I have to make certain decisions about like, how am I going to sit or stand? And how high is my strap going to be? Because there's a certain height where it stresses my left elbow. And if I'm sitting, I have to make sure that I don't, it's either one side or the other is going to get, the arthritis on one side or the spinal, the L4, L5 on the other side. There's always some kind of physical thing, but to counterbalance that, I'm not having to travel. So it's not getting on planes. And then, more recently, I've also been playing a lot of electric guitar gigs around LA, which means I don't have to schlep a Fender Pro Reverb to the gig, which is, whatever it is, 50, 60 pounds worth of tubes and transformers and speakers and stuff.
Oh, you're anticipating a question I had, and that is, let's suppose the situation very suddenly got better and things returned. Are there activities, types of gigs and so forth that you might choose to not do again that you were doing before?
I would question getting on an airplane for gigs that aren't really at a certain level. And I've kind of graduated from doing, the kind of the smaller gigs over the years, the smaller gigs to more of the performing arts centers and, kind of higher levels of jazz clubs and stuff like that. So I think I'd be more selective about where I'd be playing. But the reality is that some of the smaller gigs are just going to go away. I mean, some of these businesses are not going to be able to maintain their premises or their, whatever their business model is severely disrupted by by all the shutdowns. So, I mean, there are clubs around LA that I don't know are going to reopen.
Yeah.
And on the acoustic guitar circuit, there are a lot of more intimate venues that can't necessarily survive. So I think it's going to be a different era when we do come out of this. But I think that my focus is I'm having the time and not having to deal with travel has given me more of an opportunity to really focus on music. Mm-hmm. And being able to, whether it's, following up on guitar players that I used to listen to and haven't listened to in some years, and I, go on YouTube and then go down the YouTube rabbit hole. Like, for example, I'd long forgotten that René Thomas, who's a Belgian guitar player that worked with Stan Getz, who I would enjoy listening to 30, 40 years ago. And I had a portion of my record collection was stolen in the mid-'70s. And as a result, there are certain records that I'd just forgotten about. And being able to find stuff on YouTube has been, because I'm a perpetual student of music and of guitar. And to be able to, find video, let's say, of Oscar Alleman, who, is not necessarily as well known as Django Reinhardt, but was a great guitar player, and Josephine Baker's musical director.
I did not know that, and I have to admit I had not heard this name.
Well, fabulous player.
Mm-hmm. It looks like California was doing the right thing and now seems to be going backwards. What's your day-to-day life like? Do you go out much?
I go to the post office to fill orders for CDs when they come in. Yeah. We were getting out more. We've actually kind of scaled back because I think California is going to go back into full lockdown sometime in the next week or so. So 1 second. Excuse me. But I mean, I've done a few. I did a virtual concert from a local theater last month. I played at a virtual gala where I drove down to San Diego. I mean, I've done a few gigs, done a few sessions, like socially distant sessions where everybody's isolated. But mostly I feel like I'm going back to an earlier era before I really started putting out solo guitar records and touring, when I was active as a composer, doing TV and movie stuff. And there's a musical that we have that is in development that we were anticipating a tour later this year. That's now pushed back into next year. So I've been working on arrangements and demos for that, and doing kind of virtual studio work. People send me tracks to do guitar parts. But the one thing that's quite different these days is that whereas it used to be I just send an audio track, now they want video too. Oh. And that's a little different scenario, because whereas, if you're building a guitar track, for example, you can do it a phrase at a time or, a section at a time. And hang on 1 sec.
Sure.
Okay. No, it's fine. You can do it one section at a time, but when you're doing like performance video, if they want a performance out of it, you actually have to perform the piece, and it's a little different approach to the way of recording things. Right now I'm doing something for, there's an LA film conducting intensive where they assigned composers to write pieces for various instruments. And they asked me to be the guitar player to interpret this. And I just got sent three pieces that I've got to record and video myself doing one of those this week. And I've identified the one that is the most guitaristic, but there's another one that's kind of a cool electric guitar thing that requires either looping or overdubs. So I may end up just recording that on its own terms, because it seems like an interesting composition. But there are, that kind of thing where it's like, okay, yeah, give us an iPhone video. Well, I'm set up here to do, a higher level of recording than that. So, I might use the iPhone for like a fourth camera if I want to do multiple cameras. But so I've had to become a bit conversant with the video and streaming technology just to be able to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
And it's no longer, being able to kind of fall out of bed, grab a cup of tea, and then come into the studio. You got to kind of quaff the dew and and there are certain periods of day in here where I have stained glass windows kind of on either side, and the light comes in. And yesterday I did something for a Beatle-related project where I kind of timed it so that the light was shining on my fingers, so I'd kind of go to a particular chord and there would be this kind of flash of light, and it was kind of like, it was a cool effect. So I hope they like it, because it was fun to do.
Speaking of effects, I'm going to just alter our view here for a moment. It sounds like you're about as busy as you could be, and
oh yeah,
yeah, that's great. Did you have a time back, I don't know, maybe in March or something, a certain moment where you really started to believe that this pandemic was serious?
It happened very quickly. It was funny because I saw that there were going to be some travel limitations, and I was actually, I was ready to get a new car. And I think it was March 10th, I got a Subaru Crosstrek, anticipating that I'd probably be doing a lot of driving in California. Because it was, I had to cancel a tour of Taiwan. And then when I went out to dinner with a friend on the 12th of March and learned that he had a number of colleagues who had been hospitalized because they'd been on a skiing trip to northern Italy, and realizing that it was in the community already. And then that weekend, I had 3 Southern California gigs, all of which got canceled kind of the day before. And at that point, it was like, okay, we went into lockdown before the city went into lockdown, which for a while was really uncomfortable because we couldn't see the grandchildren. Since then, we've now, they come over to swim, and we just keep a distance. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of socializing going on. Actually, is an interesting one. And I'm having a second socially distanced lunch with a friend of mine who's 87 now. Perry Botkin Jr. is a composer, was a TV composer, who wrote Nadia's theme, which is the theme from The Young and the Restless that Nadia Comaneci used, which was originally actually a source cue from, I think, Mork and Mindy, because Perry did the music for Mork and Mindy at Paramount. But what's really interesting is that his dad, Perry Botkin Sr., was Bing Crosby's musical director for 17 years and kind of stepped into Eddie Lang's role, because Eddie Lang and Bing Crosby had a very close relationship. And Perry Botkin, really, I think, and I'm kind of learning this from talking to Perry Jr. and from just doing my own research, that Perry was kind of the link between the New York jazz studio guitar players like Eddie Lang and the LA studio players, because Perry kind of made that move and really became very established in LA in the pre-Wrecking Crew era. Ended up writing music. He wrote music for the Munsters, and was, there's some interesting video of him on YouTube. He was in the Birth of the Blues movie with Bing Crosby, mm-hmm. Which I think is kind of an idealized story of the crossover of jazz from black to white musicians, with the what's the jazz band that put out the first kind of supposedly legitimate
Oh yeah, the original
jazz record.
jazz.
The original Dixieland Jazz Band, yeah.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding the fact that you had many artists earlier than that, my focus has been, in fact, since we were last together, my focus has been on the history of fingerstyle guitar and the instruments. And I put out a folio last year with Hal Leonard called The Evolution of Fingerstyle Guitar. And I started with transcriptions of lute music from 1507 from Petrucci's first folio of lute tablature, and then followed that through Baroque guitar and Renaissance guitar, Baroque guitar, classical into the early 20th century, and really followed the kind of the timeline and the stylistic areas, and just how much, one of the things that really became evident to me was how much the concept of the chord progression, like we experience it in jazz, the rhythm changes or whatever, has its historical antecedents in the 16th century. You had the Romanesca, the Passamezzo Moderno, these progressions that actually still get used even today. The Romanesca being kind of the foundation of the Greensleeves progression. And then in the Baroque era, the Folia or the Folies d'Espagne progression, which the closest the pop song that was written on that is Green Leaves of Summer, was actually on the Folia progression. And you can find that progression from Corelli, Lully, through Beethoven. It's in the Fifth Symphony, second movement, Rachmaninoff, and into even pop songwriting. And how much these concepts of chord progressions really kind of date back to the 16th century, where the dominant instruments were fretted string instruments like the lute and the vihuela in Spain, and then the Renaissance guitar, and in the early day where keyboards were still fairly rudimentary, and how that area of kind of crossover between folk music practices, popular music practices in their own era, and what became kind of musicologically defined as classical music. There's a very gray area in between all that. But what's fascinating to me is how much improvisation was a big part of that, even through into the early 19th century.
Can I ask you, you've played with so many people, you've been around the world, are you still a citizen of England?
I have dual citizenship. I became a U.S. citizen in 1988.
Yeah. Well, my question is, observing American politics and being familiar with British politics, do you have any thought about the political situation that seems to be accompanying the pandemic situation?
Well, my thought is that, basically what we did on both sides of the Atlantic is society crashed into the information age. And we haven't sorted out how to deal with information, misinformation, propaganda, and all the political and power dynamics that go along with that. Whether it's a Brexit type scenario or what we're dealing with here in terms of the politicization of just simple precautions like wearing masks. Mm-hmm. I think that it's a product of us not really being well prepared to deal with the amount of information that we're given. And it's great, being able to access all this, centuries worth of music on YouTube at no cost, except maybe the occasional ad for dishwashing soap or whatever. But the downside of it is that we don't have an easy mechanism for processing information, short of spending a great deal of time what I do. I mean, when I wake up at dawn, typically, the first thing I do is I have a group of websites that I look at across the spectrum to see kind of what one side or the other is pushing as their particular agenda, and then try and find the middle ground where you can at least have some sense of what objective truth is.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I'm a guitar player, and I'll cast my vote on election day or before if I do mail-in, which I think is probably the sensible thing to do. But it's like I have my opinions. In high school, I mean, my senior year, our two main books of study were 1984 and Brave New World. And I didn't realize at the time, I thought they were novels. They turned out they're actually manuals for how to deal with the future.
In your when you do go out or on the gigs you're able to play, have you observed positive and or negative behavior by your fellow citizens?
Well, where I am, this is a fairly quiet neighborhood, and when we go out, we walk the dogs 3 times a day, and we wear our masks, and our neighbors wear their masks, and we've not really seen anything in our immediate locality that I could point to and say that's just irresponsible. Mm-hmm. But LA is a big place, and I think one of the things, again, talking about information and data, is that we don't really get a clear picture as to the granular detail. You get these kind of gross numbers on the number of cases, for example, but you don't really get a clear and easy breakdown on where those numbers are being generated. You have to start digging deeper to find out, let's say there's a big hotspot, but it's typically these are, prisons, meatpacking factories, churches, anywhere where you have a lot of people in an enclosed space and no real precautions being taken. Mm-hmm. So, and that, I imagine, is a full-time job for an epidemiologist, let alone a guitar player. So, I just have to kind of stand back and say, okay, I'm just going to do my thing, which is to be responsible. And, part of that responsibility is to at least use my skill set to entertain people who are on the front lines. I mean, there are a number of people who watch or listen to my Facebook Live who are in emergency rooms. And, kind of they'll go into the break room for 15 minutes to relax for a bit. So that's kind of a pro bono thing. And that's, the best I can do under those circumstances. But it also is beneficial to me because I'm able to maintain my technique and repertoire. And it took me a while. The thing that took me a little while was to get used to the idea of performing for an audience that were only there by virtue of me being able to see, comments. It's like being on television where you just have to imagine the audience that you're performing to.
Yes.
A little better than television because you do get that immediate feedback. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when I'm playing, my eyes are closed or, I'm not watching every comment as it goes by. I can only glance up occasionally or in between tunes. So from a performance perspective, that has been a challenge because I've had to really learn how to focus in that way. And being in a studio, typically in a studio situation, you get to do retakes of things. And, I have to be able to, as one does, play through the memory lapses or, the places where the fingers kind of get tied up in knots or whatever. And have just have that kind of propulsion to create an entertaining and engaging performance. But it takes a lot of preparation too, because now I've got it down to like Monday is Moody Monday. So my repertoire is stuff that is either minor key or has a certain kind of moodiness to it. Wednesdays have now become workshop Wednesdays.
I see.
Because the audience were asking, they like hearing about guitars and hearing differences with guitars. So, that's this. This week is my arch tops. Last week was my Martin flat tops, starting with my 1893 parlor guitar. This one, 1893. So pretty amazing, and it weighs nothing. It's like
I like the answer. I think I was watching when someone wrote in and said, "Well, how many guitars do you own?" Do you answer?
I forget what I answered. As many as I need, certainly.
Right.
But the thing is that kind of this Moody Monday, Workshop Wednesday, and Fingerbuster Friday, each one of those requires that I do work in advance. I kind of identify, okay, for example, when there's a request comes in, I have to say, okay, is this something that I've already arranged and not played since I recorded it, and then have to, revisit that? Or is it something that I have to pull out of the hat, as it were? But one of the things, I've spent a lot of time really concentrating on altered tunings and very, very meticulous arrangements of things. But the counterbalance to that is that I've spent over the last few years, especially as I've done more jazz gigs, a lot more improvisation. Mm-hmm. And so looking for the opportunity to be able to dive into a Gershwin tune or a Harold Arlen tune or something in a way where I'm not having to also kind of recall the intricacy of a altered tuning arrangement, but just be able to be in standard tuning and just kind of go for the gusto,
Yeah.
And my friend Lee Newman is the grandson of Jimmy McHugh, the songwriter. And so I've thrown in, on my last but one album, I did I Can't Give You Anything But Love, Baby. And I just recently did I'm in the Mood for Love. I did a recording of that for him. And I did Sunny Side of the Street too, which are all, Jimmy McHugh songs. And I like to be able to kind of pull out something from that era and just be able to launch into the improvisational aspects of it. I miss having a rhythm section, however.
Right.
But that's something to be determined. There's a local studio that I just found out has set it up where each one of its recording rooms is now set up so that each musician can be in it their own room, and they have linkage between all the different rooms. So even though we couldn't be on the same stage, we could be performing together and streaming it. So that's something to consider, but it's still not the same as having an audience there to get that feedback from.
Isolation booths have taken on an added meaning. Yeah. So people who watch this are going to want to know, over your right shoulder is a shiny record, and over your left shoulder.
Yeah. The shiny record, that's a platinum album for Wings Back to the Egg.
Okay.
I was in Wings from 78 to 81. And the picture next to that is Paul McCartney with a concertina sitting on the balcony of a castle, a 12th century castle on the south coast of England when we were recording. The one above that is Linda McCartney at a Hammond B3 organ, and you can't really see clearly, but the on top of the organ is there's a pack of senior service players, senior service cigarettes, no filter tips, which is what Paul smoked at the time. There's a cup of tea, a Scotch and Coke, a bunch of boxes of Kodak recording film, which you could run at very high ISO, so you didn't have to use flash, because flash photography in a studio situation is kind of a no-no. It's too distracting. Yeah. And we would do it. That was during the Rockestra session when we had not only Wings in Abbey Road Studio, but we also had it was like members of the Who, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. It was crazy. It was a rock orchestra.
Wow.
This side, that's me with Wings when we were filming a video of a hit song we had called Good Night Tonight. That's at the Hammersmith Palais, which is a venue in London with a revolving stage that I used to play at when I was just getting into studio work. I played with, there was a band, Ken McIntosh, who was a band leader, had one of those kind of 3 saxes and 2 trumpets, trombone, rhythm section, kind of, playing hits of the day. It was always good sight reading practice for me. And then, let's see, up top is an award I got for my co-composing of the score of Diablo 3, which was a video game that I did composing on. And then below that is a picture that Mike McCartney, Paul's brother, took in, I think, 1961 of Paul, John, and Gene Vincent at the Cavern Club in Liverpool. And then below that is just a bunch of acoustic guitars.
Well, I have a burning question here. Do your grandchildren get to play with your guitars?
My eldest just started playing. My youngest just started piano lessons yesterday. They're 7 and 5, so they're still a little bit on the young side, because my guitars, other than a ukulele or 2, my guitars are kind of, adult-sized guitars.
Yeah. Well, I have grandchildren the same age.
Oh, there you go. Fun.
Yeah.
Something, yeah.
Well, Laurence, I want to thank you for your time, and I admire how busy you have remained, and your tea time with Laurence Juber and the success.
Yeah, but our whole family. I mean, Hope, my wife Hope, is other than working with me on the musical that we're developing, she's involved in production of a potential TV show. My eldest daughter, Nico, has written a musical, which she did a Zoom reading of last week with a bunch of really high-level New York talent. And then my youngest daughter, Ilse, has become a very successful songwriter. Mm-hmm. And she is busy writing and hasn't stopped. Learned how to run Pro Tools so she can record vocals at home. And everybody in the family is just really busy. So happily, we're in a position where we have that flexibility. I mean, having done studio work for as long as I have, I get a pension from the Musicians Union and Social Security, and then I've got a revenue stream from royalties on 30 albums that I've recorded, stuff that gets played on Sirius and Pandora, Spotify. And it all kind of keeps things afloat without having the pressure of having to deal with the fact that there's no money gigs.
Yes.
But I miss the live experience, obviously.
Well, we hope it comes back as soon as possible, and I have a feeling all of us who miss it so badly, that first gig is just going to be like terrific.
Yeah.
To get that heart started.
Yeah. All right, then.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome, and enjoyed the conversation, and anytime.
Okay.
All right, then.
Over and out.
Right. Stay safe. Cheers.